I'm sure by now that you guys must have noticed, especially those of you who listen to the second podcast, that's the So You're Getting Married podcast, which is my podcast that is aimed at marriage and relationships and things of a much more personal nature. I'm sure you'd have noticed that the intros for both shows are now gone. And that's because my wife listens to the podcast from time to time, and she's made some criticisms of my radio voice that went with the intros. So let's just put it that way. So wifey doesn't like radio voice, and so radio voice has to go. So for now, we're going to go back to the much more classic approach of starting off the podcast, which was the way that I used to run this run this show from day one when I started this thing slightly over a year and maybe 2 months ago, a year and a month ago. I think it was March. No, not March. I think it was February of last year, just shortly before the coronavirus thing hit, or at least before it became a big thing in Niger. So, apart from that change, that is the end of radio voice. Everything else on the show is going to stay exactly the same. And I'm sure that this has made you guys realize that I am open to constructive criticism and proddings if they make sense. If I think they make sense, let me put it that way. So, if you have any feedback about the show, for those people who have reached out to say it's awesome, like the last fellow who did that was the photographer, Daudu. Sorry, I can't remember. So reach out, let me have the feedback. It's greatly appreciated. So, let's move on to what we're going to talk about today. Since I made 2 or 3 detours, I'm not exactly sure I remember what the last topic was. So, regardless of whatever the detour was, I'm getting back to the train of thought that we were trying to explore on professionalism, business communications, and networking. And so we were on the working definition approach and how a good idea is to model your idea of professionalism based on the Nigerian school of professionalism. Basically, that is whatever a Nigerian parent says professional means, that is what we are going to adopt. And when Nigerians say, I want my son or my daughter to study a professional course, they mean law, accounting, medicine, or engineering. Now, that is a good approach that we can run with because Nigerian professional courses, these courses that I have listed out, they have best practices and standards that cut across the board and work well with different disciplines. It's something that I've mentioned before. So you will find that whatever it is that these disciplines prescribe as what should be professional, you find that you can take that and apply to your wedding photography practice, your wedding video practice, your wedding planning practice, your carpentry practice, your baking practice, or your makeup practice. And to make a point, at some point before I made the detour, we explored 2 of those. One of them was dress and the other was punctuality. And so regardless of what these disciplines say about dress, it is clear about one thing, that law, accounting, medicine, and engineering promote this idea that a true professional, is supposed to dress a certain way. So for law and medicine, that seems to be determined by conventions. So you need to have the immaculate, that gown that the doctors wear. You need to have that gown. And then if you're in surgery, you need to wear those overalls. And I've noticed that they seem to have different colors. So the doctors' overalls, even though they look the same, like a nurse's one, they have different colors. So the nurses, different colors, the cleaning staff, different colors, the doctors, different colors. And then for law, it's also based on conventions as well. The wig and the gown with the silly pocket at the back. And then accounting, that is also something that is determined by convention. It's supposed to be business attire. But when it comes to engineering and their sister professions, Archi and the rest, it is something that is determined by practicality and also by health and safety concerns. So engineering, you have to wear those funky shoes. So it doesn't matter that they look sexy or not. You're a female engineer. You're not going to go there wearing high heels. You have to wear those ugly shoes. so that nobody drops a hammer and destroys your toes. You also have to wear the safety hat. What else? Some materials that you can wear, some that you can't, depending on things being flammable or not. So regardless of whatever the basis is, whether it's convention or whether it's health and safety, you can see that there's this idea that professionals are supposed to dress a certain way. And so in the past, we ran through some suggestions that some of my early students came up with, the wedding planners to be, who are part of the Party Planning Academy, as run by my friend Laura Michael Phillips. So we ran through a couple of things, whether it should be corporate and gown or suit, or whether it should be corporate casual. We looked at the idea of being presentable. There was this blanket rule of no jeans or no t-shirt. These are just some of the ideas that were thrown around by the students. And I didn't shoot down anything because all ideas are welcome. But I just pointed out that it has to be relative to the context. What is it that you're doing? If you're out in the field as a wedding planner, then jeans and t-shirts, might work. Because it will be funny to have you out in the field and you're sweating it out with your Louboutins and your immaculate, whatever kind of suit it is that women are supposed to wear as a business statement. And then I also pointed out that it has to be contextual to whether you're dealing with a new client, an old client. Okay, I've already mentioned field work. So it depends on the relationship, it depends on the context, on a couple of things. But that is something that we ought to have in mind, that there's a certain way to dress professionally. And then we also looked at the idea of being punctual. So I think that's enough for a recap to bring us to where we're going to take off for today. And if you are interested in catching up, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, then skip back. I think I made 2 or 3 detours. So just skip back 2 or 3 episodes and you'll be able to get back on the train and it'll catch you up to speed, at least as relating to this current tranche of what it is that we are talking about. The episodes will be easy to find because they have some kind of prefix that has either professionalism in it, business communications, or networking. So once you see the title, you'll see pretty much that it's all the same series. So now we're looking at the idea of clarity of communications. And then there's also case management methodology. But since we're already at 7 minutes, I think I'll just riff on clarity of communications and work specifications and then leave it at that. And we'll see how it applies to those of us in the wedding and the event space. And then after we're done with this, with everything, hopefully I'll be able to, if I remember, I should start making detailed notes as I make these recordings. Okay, so anyway, hopefully as I'm done with everything, I should be able to tie it in as to how it relates to sales practices, since that is what this podcast is all about, how we can use personal sales to grow our businesses. So, clarity of communications and work specifications. Now, for these disciplines that we've mentioned, there's this idea that if you're saying something, you have to be very clear about what you're saying. If you're writing something, you ought to be very clear about what it is that you're writing. Whatever means or modes you're trying to use to communicate in, it is expected that you're going to be able to do so clearly and succinctly, as our people say, with the practice of the law. So it's the same with medicine, and the same with engineering, and the same with accounting. When you're speaking about rights, responsibilities, and obligations, you have to be able to say so clearly. When you're talking about preparing a corporate account for XYZ corporation, you have to be clear about your accounting period, which accounting controls you're using, accounting standards that you're using. It's the same with medicine. Before you prescribe medication, you need to know that the person is a 56-year-old man who is 120 kilograms, and so because of that, he only needs XYZ milligrams of blah, 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 blah. And you also have to be very clear on what the diagnosis is, on what the symptoms were, and things of that nature. And the same thing with the engineers. Now, it's obvious why for Nigerian professional courses, they harp on about communications, this whole thing of being clear in communications. It's because if you mess up, then you really F things up for everyone. So for the lawyer, if you're not clear about determining the rights, the obligations, the responsibilities, and your diagnosis of what the situation is, then you totally F things up in court and your client has wasted money. And these professional courses, if you notice, they are big on reputation. So once you get a reputation as a lawyer who is constantly effing things up, you're not going to make as much money. It's the same thing with accountants. You build up a shoddy reputation, and then after a while, people cannot rely on your professional opinion. For those of you who doubt, I'm sure you remember, if you are a late 70s or early 80s child like I am, you remember some of the accounting scandals that have happened. I mean, before the Enron thing, there was it Arthur Anderson, or I can't remember the names of these accounting firms, but in our younger days, that's, let's say, secondary school into university, there have been 2 or 3 bus stops, of accounting firms that were involved in some businesses that went belly up, and shoddy accounting was used. I think for the Enron thing, I can't remember the accounting firm that was involved in the whole thing. Instead of how they were doing, is it accrual-based accounting or something like that? And I'm not a professional, so I don't know about the niceties. And I'm sure you have folks like my wife who are listening to the podcast now. She has more experience in finance, so at this point she's probably saying, can you shut up, don't confuse these people, you are saying the wrong thing. And so I'll just leave it there. But bottom line is, we have these giant accounting firms that used to be renowned the world over, and then all you have is one, okay, it's not a small, Enron was a major F-up. So you have one major F-up, and then people are not going to do business with you again. And so we have one of these firms who that actually had to close up shop and then reincorporate as another entity before they're able to get business up and moving again. And then what else? So, of course, if you're not clear on your communications, your client will die. That's if you are involved in medicine or engineering. For engineering, costs skyrocket and people could die. Medicine, it's also the same, costs and people die. But I think they're much more concerned about people dying than the cost of Medicare overall. So, with this in mind, it is obvious why for Nigerian professional courses, it is clear why for them communication is key. You need to be able to assess a situation and communicate clearly with your clients, with the other stakeholders, communicate with the judge, communicate with the accounting authorities, communicate with the other physicians, with the referring doctor or whatever, and the engineer has to be able to communicate directly to the architect, and you people need to be able to communicate very well to the workmen to be sure that you're using the right quantity of cement and it can carry the workload. Was it the workload or the load? Anyway, I'm not in these professions, so forgive me if I'm using the wrong terms. So that's the reason why clarity of communication and work specifications are absolutely essential. Now, do these carry over to those of us in the wedding and the event space? The answer, in my opinion, is absolutely. It should. We do have wedding planners, wedding photographers, wedding videographers, and the like who go around. They don't quite communicate properly. They don't say what they mean. They don't mean what they say. What else? When they communicate with clients, things are not clear. That's why people harp on about contracts, is because they're trying to plug this whole clarity of communication. But we ought to be extremely clear when we are communicating with our clients. Good morning, Mr. Bride, Mrs. Groom. I am Kemi of XYZ wedding planning. How can I help? Okay, so your wedding is this date. Okay, 20th of November. You make sure you write that down, and you make sure that you feed it back to them eventually as you guys move on, because it's not uncommon for the first date they gave you to be 20th of November, and you're rolling with that, but then changes are made, and it's actually 27th, but then for some reason they forget to let you know, and the whole thing of double booking comes up. So we need to be clear about communications when we're trying to figure out what it is that they need and what the work specifications are going to be. Is it going to be 8,000 people? Do we want table sheets of Egyptian cotton, or do we want Chinese linen, or Do we want Christmas lights? The reason why I keep going back to Egyptian cotton and Christmas lights is because I don't know anything about wedding planning. And for my own wedding, one of those things, one of our touching points was Christmas lights. I love the Christmas lights. The wedding planner was like, Christmas lights, the time has passed. That was old season. That was so 2000 and blah, 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 blah. It's so passe, it's out of fashion. But I just wanted the Christmas lights. So, anyway, that's why I keep using the examples for wedding planners and decor people. So we need to be clear about what all those specifications are. So same thing for the videographers. Is it a 5-minute trailer or is it a 20-minute trailer? Oh, madam, when we start reaching 20 minutes, we're not talking trailer anymore. So let's adjust our expectations. This is what I recommend. But then again, if this is what you want, this is how we'll structure it. This is how much it's going to cost. For photographers, is this going to be a 12 by 12 book or is it going to be a 12 by 24? Okay, you don't know what that means? Hold on. Let's have a meeting on Tuesday. I will bring samples and you just point out what you want. Okay, you want this one? No problem. That is not 12 by 12. That is a 12 by 14. No problem. It is this amount. Delivery is going to be 3 weeks. You don't just say delivery is going to be 3 weeks and leave it at that. Because you might be thinking delivery for the photo book is going to be 3 weeks after they select the wedding photos. But they might think 3 weeks is going to be the sum total for delivery regardless of whenever they select the photos. So they might take 2 weeks to select the photos and then expect you to deliver in 1 week. So you see how if we're not clear about communications, how quarrel begins to ensue. So we have to be absolutely clear. So, madam, delivery is 3 weeks from the date of when you guys select the photos. So if the wedding is on November 20th and you guys select photos on the 21st before you leave for the honeymoon, then no problem. The photos will be ready by December, whatever 3 weeks from that date is. And so we need to really be on top of our game when it comes to communicating our expectations, communicating our understanding of the problem that they're trying to solve, and communicating what the work specifications are going to be, so that at the end of the day there is no quarrel whatsoever. So I think I've riffed enough on clarity of communications and work specifications. When we get into business communications, this is something that we'll talk about in detail, especially when we're looking at modes of communications, whether we're using emails or phone calls or I almost said fax. But I think I've only seen one person fax a document, and that is a friend of mine. He's a lawyer, so I was surprised that people are still faxing today. But yeah, so people still fax. So we will get to all that in clarity of communications. And so yeah, I think that's it. We'll just wrap it up there. But I hope so far that we're all along on the gist, and we're kind of getting the whole idea that whatever it is, these old school professional courses, in quote, as we call them in Nigeria, or whatever it is that they say is professionalism, that is exactly what professionalism is, and it has a corollary to what it is that we do as wedding and industry event people. So far, I hope you have been convinced and not confused that because for the lawyer, for the accountant, for the medical doctor, and for the engineer to be professional, you have to dress a certain way, you have to be punctual, and you have to be able to communicate clearly, and you also have to be able to say very clearly what your work specifications and your timelines are. That is an approach that we ought to adopt as wedding and event industry people. For wedding planners, they don't have this problem because they can't really do their job without being clear anyway. Because if you tell the wedding planner we're expecting about 800 people, for the wedding planner, it actually makes a difference whether there are 800 people or there are 857 people. It has clear implications for cost. So they're always going to want to push down for a close enough figure as possible. Now, okay, when you say 800, do you mean 800 on the dot, or you mean like 800 like it can enter like 880, 900? Because the implications for cost are very clear. So wedding planners don't really have that kind of a problem. So in my own opinion, I think as we makeup artists and photographers and those of us who are more artsy, in our craft who run into these sorts of problems. So a makeup person might say, okay, I'm going to do your makeup 150K. You guys argue back and forth and you say, okay, you know what? Let's just make it 200K, but then we'll do for your bridal train as well. And the bride says, oh, thank you very much. Oh, we are, and you guys are all loving up and everything until you show up on the day and you realize that for that 200K, when you said, I'll do you and the bridal train, that she has a bridal train of 18 people, but you are thinking more like 4 or 5 because all the Abuja weddings you've done so far is only 5 people. So you have to be clear on those communications. And then wedding photographers, you say, I'll be there like that kind 8, But we have to be clear about when is the makeup starting, when do you think we're going to be able to take those photos, what locations are we using. These things are really important because if the locations are 30 minutes apart and you want to hit 2 locations before you guys go to church, then you can't just say, I'll be there like that kind around 8. You have to be much more clearer than that. So wedding planners, they don't have that much of a problem. So those of us photographers, videographers, makeup people, those of us we pride ourselves on being artists, we need to hook up with wedding planners and the decor people so that we can learn from them because they have to be on their point, on their game when it comes to these sorts of things. Because if everything is going to start at 10 o'clock, then the decor people know that, okay, they have to absolutely be done by, maybe 8 o'clock. And that means they may have been doing setup from the night before or something like that. So they're much more on point when it comes to being professional in this regard, when it comes to punctuality and communicating what the work specifications and what the timelines are going to be. So thank you very much for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based event and wedding photographer, Tarishima Ayede. I will catch you guys on the next episode.